Welcome to Aging in Recovery. I'm Gil Cintron, licensed master social worker and founder of Never Alone Home Care Services Incorporated. For the past several videos, I have focused on the problem, the invisible cohort. Older adults in long-term recovery, people with decades of clean or sober time who are now facing the ordinary realities of aging, mobility loss, chronic illness, memory challenges, isolation, and grief, and the need for home care assisted living or nursing level support. But today I want to move from the problem to the proposed model, not as a finished institution, a treatment program, or a recovery house, but as a framework, a proposed model of care. I call it the Aging in Recovery Residential Model, or ARRM, ARRM. ARRM is designed for people who are aging in recovery and can no longer safely live on their own. That distinction is important. This is not a substance abuse treatment facility or a transitional recovery house. ARRM is an aging care model grounded in social work, gerontology, recovery management, person-centered care, and recovery-informed practice. The central question is this: what would aging services look like if they understood long-term recovery as a lifelong identity, a source of strength, and a continuing support need? That is the question behind ARRM. The idea behind ARRM begins with a simple but serious observation. America has built systems for addiction crisis. We have detox centers, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, and medication-assisted treatment. We have recovery housing, mutual aid groups, and 12-step fellowships. And America has also built systems for aging, home care, assisted living, nursing homes, adult day programs, and hospice. But very little has been built at the intersection of long-term recovery and later life. That gap matters. It matters because recovery does not simply end when someone becomes elderly or needs a walker, needs help bathing, or enters assisted living or a nursing home. In fact, the research literature on recovery management and recovery-oriented systems of care has long argued that recovery should be understood as a long-term process, supported by continuing care, community connection, and recovery capital. William White and others helped move the field away from a narrow acute care model and towards a broader understanding of recovery as a sustained process over time. That idea is central to ARRM because ARRM is not asking, how do we treat addiction in old age? ARRM is asking something different. How do we support people who already achieved long-term recovery as they move through the final stages of life? That is a different question, and it requires a different model. Never Alone Home Care Services, Inc. is built around a dual-track approach. The first track is aging in place. That means helping people remain in their homes and communities for as long as safely possible. For that track, the focus is not on turning home attendants into clinicians. That would be unrealistic and inappropriate. Home attendants are not social workers, therapists, substance use counselors, and many may have limited formal education. So the training must be practical, clear, respectful, and appropriate to their role. A trained home attendant serving someone aging in recovery should know how to recognize warning signs, not diagnose, not treat, but notice signs like increased isolation, extreme sadness, being more irritable than usual, withdrawal from recovery supports and friends, missed medical appointments, changes in hygiene patterns, expressions of hopelessness. The home attendant's role is not to provide therapy, and they are not sponsors. Their role is to observe, support, document, and alert the appropriate supervisor or professional. They may also help the person stay connected, escort them to medical appointments or recovery supports or meetings, assist them logging on to online meetings or therapy sessions, support daily routines, and provide companionship. This is the first track, aging in place and recovery-informed home care. The aging in recovery residential model is the second track. ARRM is for those who can no longer safely age in place, those who need a more structured environment, such as assisted living or nursing home levels of care. And that is where the model becomes especially important. ARRM is not necessarily one building. It can be a standalone facility, but it can also be a model incorporated into an existing assisted living facility or nursing home. The model should be teachable, adaptable, and capable of being integrated into existing systems. This really matters because the goal of ARRM is replication. An assisted living facility should adopt an ARRM unit. A nursing home should adopt ARRM principles. A nonprofit could develop a specialized ARRM residence. A university partnership could use the model for training, research, and workforce development. The core idea is not simply the building. The core idea is the philosophy. ARRM would rest on several pillars. First, recovery-informed culture. Second, person-centered aging care. Third, continuity of recovery support. Fourth, purpose and contribution. Fifth, workforce training. Sixth, research and professional education. Now, let me discuss each of these one at a time. First, recovery-informed culture. ARRM assumes that the entire environment matters, not just the clinical staff, but administrators, medical staff, home health aides, recreation staff, kitchen staff, security, maintenance, janitors, everyone. Because residents do not experience a facility through their formal treatment plans. They experience it through daily human contact. How are they spoken to? Whether they are respected or their history is judged. Whether their recovery identity is understood, and if they feel safe and visible. That means every staff member must be trained in basic recovery-informed principles: compassion, respect, dignity, non-judgment, patience, confidentiality, awareness of stigma, awareness of trauma, and awareness that recovery is often maintained through connection, routine, meaning, and community and continuity. This is consistent with recovery-oriented systems of care, which emphasize that recovery is supported by networks, relationships, community resources, and environments that promote long-term wellness rather than simply acute stabilization. ARRM takes that idea and asks, what does recovery-oriented care look like when the person is 65, 75 years, or even older, and is living in assisted care? Second, person-centered aging care. ARRM must also be grounded in gerontology. Older adults are not simply bodies to be managed. They are people with histories, preferences, autonomy, relationships, losses, and identities. Person-centered care in long-term care emphasizes dignity, autonomy, personal history, and meaningful participation. Research on dignity in nursing homes warns that dignity can be threatened when older adults are treated as tasks rather than persons. ARRM must take that seriously. A person aging in recovery should not be reduced to a former addict, a patient, a bed, a chart, a diagnosis, or a Medicaid number. They are a whole person. They may be a parent, a grandparent, a business owner, a former sponsor, a retired worker or civil servant, a veteran, a person of faith, an artist, a former teacher or professor, a mentor, or a survivor. And their recovery history is just one small part of who they are. Not something to be hidden, not something to be ashamed of, not something staff should casually dismiss. ARRM recognizes recovery as part of identity, and identity matters deeply in aging. Third, continuity of recovery support. This is one of the most important parts of the model. Many people in long-term recovery have spent decades building routines that help establish and sustain their lives. Meetings, phone calls, sponsors, sponsees, reading, prayer, meditation, being of service, and community. When aging disrupts those routines, the person may become vulnerable to relapse. Not because they lack motivation, not because they are weak, but because the structure that supported their recovery begins to disappear. A sponsor dies, a friend dies, a spouse dies, mobility declines, transportation becomes difficult, memory begins to change, the person becomes homebound. They enter assisted living or a nursing home. ARRM would not treat these as minor lifestyle issues. It would treat them as central care issues. The care plan would include recovery support planning. Can this resident attend meetings? Do they need transportation? Do they need help accessing online meetings? Do they have a sponsor or a recovery contact? Have they lost important recovery relationships? Are they isolated? Are they grieving or showing signs of depression? Are they disconnected from the routines that gave their life structure? This is not treatment. This is continuity of recovery-informed care. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's work on older adults and substance use emphasizes that older adults have distinct needs, including medical complexity, isolation, grief, cognitive changes, and the importance of age-sensitive approaches. The Aging and Recovery residential model builds from that foundation. It focuses specifically on the person who is already in long-term recovery and now requires aging-related support. Fourth, purpose and contribution. This is where ARRM must be very different from the warehouse model of aging. Too many long-term care environments unintentionally strip people of purpose. Residents are fed, medicated, moved, bathed, scheduled, and entertained, but they are not always meaningfully engaged. ARRM must reject that. Long-term recovery often produces enormous recovery capital. Recovery capital refers to the internal and external resources that support recovery, including social, human, physical, and cultural resources. Cloud, Granfield, White, and others have helped define recovery capital as a key concept in sustaining recovery over time. But here is the important point. Older adults in recovery do not only need recovery capital, they also possess recovery capital. They have lived experience. They have survival knowledge. They have emotional wisdom. They know what despair looks like. They know what change requires. They know what it means to build a life. ARRM will not waste that capital. Residents who are able and willing could contribute in structured and appropriate ways. They might mentor younger people in recovery, speak to students, participate in recovery education, help design peer support programming, share oral histories, teach practical skills, participate in research interviews, serve on resident councils or community boards, and help train future professionals. This must be done ethically and voluntarily, with safeguards and with respect for privacy, and never as forced labor or emotional exploitation. But the important principle is that people need purpose, and people aging in recovery may have wisdom that society urgently needs. Fifth, workforce training. ARRM would also function as a workforce development model. We need professionals who understand this population: social workers, nurses, home care supervisors, mental health professionals, substance use counselors, gerontologists, peer specialists, researchers, and policy advocates. Because right now, most professional training separates these worlds. Aging is over here, addiction treatment is over there, mental health is somewhere else, medical care is yet in another place. But real human beings do not live in separate systems. They age with all of their histories intact. ARRM could become a training site where students and professionals learn to work across disciplines, not just from textbooks, but from residents themselves. This is where the model becomes more than a residence. It becomes a center of learning, a place where social work, gerontology, medicine, mental health, substance use counseling, and peer recovery support can meet around one population. That is how a new field begins, by naming a population, studying its needs, building practice models, training workers, and creating systems of care. 6. Research and replication. ARRM must be proposed as a model that can be studied, measured, improved, and replicated. We need to ask serious questions. Does recovery-informed training improve resident trust? Does it reduce isolation? Does it improve engagement? Does it reduce depression? Does it help residents maintain recovery routines? Does it improve staff understanding? Does it reduce stigma? Does it improve quality of life? ARRM should not be built only on good intentions. It must be built with evaluation, data, resident feedback, clinical insight, gerontological principles, and ethical oversight. That is how the model becomes credible. That is how it moves from an idea to a serious framework. And let me be very clear. ARRM will not be easy to fund. It will not be easy to explain, although I've tried to articulate it. And it may not fit neatly into any existing category. That is often the problem with new models. Systems are usually designed to fund what already exists and not what is emerging. But the absence of funding does not mean the absence of need. And the absence of an existing category does not mean an idea is invalid. At one time, hospice had to be imagined. Peer support had to be imagined. Recovery management had to be imagined. Harm reduction had to be imagined. Person-centered care had to be imagined. And ARRM is being proposed in that same spirit as a serious model for a population we have failed to plan for. The purpose is not to create a luxury facility. The purpose is to create a humane, recovery-informed, aging care model that can be adapted across settings. For those who can age in place, Never Alone Home Care Services represents the first track. Train home attendants, connection, observation, support, and continuity of recovery routines. For those who can no longer safely remain at home, ARRM represents the second track, a structured residential model, integrated into assisted living or nursing home care, grounded in dignity, recovery-informed practice, person-centered aging, purpose, and continuity of support. This is not about keeping people alive while they wait to die. It is about asking whether later life can still include meaning, whether recovery wisdom can still matter, whether aging services can honor the full story of a person's life, and whether the recovery generation deserves more than invisibility at the end of life. I believe it does. This is the philosophy behind ARRM. Not a treatment center, not a recovery house, not a warehouse, but a model of care for people aging in recovery who can no longer live alone but still deserve dignity, connection, purpose, and community. I am sharing this concept publicly because serious ideas have to begin somewhere. They need to be discussed, critiqued, improved, researched, and eventually tested. So I invite thoughtful discussion. Could this model be developed? Could it be integrated into assisted living? Could it be adapted inside a nursing home? Could it become a training site for social workers, counselors, nurses, and researchers? And most importantly, what do we owe the people who survived addiction, sustained recovery for decades, and are now growing old? Some may argue that society does not owe them anything. But as a social worker, guided by a professional code of ethics, and more broadly, as a compassionate and civilized society, I would argue that we owe them the same dignity, compassion, respect, and humane care we strive to offer all aging populations. The medical profession has the Hippocratic Oath. Social work has its own ethical mandate to recognize the inherent dignity and worth of every human being. That ethical responsibility does not disappear because someone once struggled with addiction. In fact, many of these individuals rebuilt their lives, reunited families, worked, paid taxes, mentored others, and contributed positively to their communities for decades. ARRM is not about rewarding addiction. It is about responding humanely and ethically to aging, long-term recovery, disability, isolation, and human vulnerability. This is the question at the center of the Aging in Recovery residential model. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and follow this channel. And most importantly, leave your thoughts and comments below. Let's continue building this conversation seriously, thoughtfully, and with dignity.